There are over 870 million people in the world who are hungry right now. Of these 870 million people, it's been estimated by the World Food Programme that 98% live in developing countries, countries that perversely produce most of the world's food stocks. Most of the countries on this list are African countries with the most undernourished population. People living in these countries suffer recurring illnesses and disabilities. So here are 10 hungriest countries in the world. Number 10. Zambia. While Zambia has reduced the rate of extreme poverty from 58% to 42%, extreme poverty continues to be much higher in rural areas compared to urban areas. Zambia's food security challenges are worsened by a high dependence on rain-fed agriculture and the absence of market incentives to encourage a fundamental shift from subsistence farming. 40% of Zambian children continue to be stunted, a figure that has remained consistent over the last few years, and the UN estimates that the current number will rise in future years. Number 9. Madagascar. The country is prone to natural disasters such as cyclones, flooding and drought. The increasing fragility of the ecosystem, due to deforestation and poor land management, is a major cause of the increased vulnerability to shocks and related food insecurity. Approximately 28% of rural households suffer from food insecurity, of which 2.7% are severely food insecure, and nearly 25% moderately food insecure. In total, about 4 million people are facing hunger. Number 8. Ethiopia. Ethiopia remains one of the world's least developed countries. Hunger in Ethiopia is widespread. The majority of the population is vulnerable to food shortages because so many of them rely on regular rains for their food and livelihoods. According to the United Nations, 4.5 million people are in need of emergency food assistance. Natural disasters have become one of the main causes of poverty in Ethiopia because so many of the country's inhabitants rely on the weather for their income. Number 7. Yemen. Yemen has had an extreme change in its food security over the last 10 years. Because of large-scale displacement, civil conflict, political instability, high food prices, endemic poverty and influxes of refugee and migrants, food insecurity has risen in the last year, with more than 20 million people across the country facing hunger, and 10 million people suffering from extreme levels of hunger. These figures have led to the UN declaring Yemen the world's largest food security crisis, driven primarily by conflict. Number 6. Chad. Poverty in Chad has been aggravated by numerous conflicts during its 50 years of independence. Tensions between the country's northern and southern ethnic groups have further contributed to political and economic instability, and Chad's landlocked location and desert climate in the north inhibit economic development. It is estimated that there are 330,000 refugees in Chad, which puts additional pressure on the limited resources of the already highly vulnerable local population. Number 5. Sudan. Hunger is rife because Sudan suffers from several challenges. For much of Sudan's history, the nation has suffered from rampant ethnic strife, and has been plagued by internal conflicts, including 2 civil wars and the war in the Darfur region. Another reason that Sudan is suffering is because of the extreme climate conditions that the country suffers from, which is something that is unfortunately out of their control. Number 4. Timor-Leste. Sitting between Indonesia and Australia, Timor-Leste is a small island with a population of just over 1 million people. It continues to suffer the after-effects of a decades-long struggle for independence against Indonesian occupation, which severely damaged the country's infrastructure. 1/3 of a population of 1.2 million suffers chronic food insecurity. Private sector development has lagged due to human capital shortages, infrastructure weakness, an incomplete legal system, and an inefficient regulatory environment. Number 3. Comoros. Comoros, which is made up of 3 tiny islands of the coast of Mozambique, has a population of just 800,000 people. Around half of the population live below the poverty line. The reason for such high numbers of poverty and undernourishment are varied. One of the biggest problems is that although there is a rapidly increasing young population entering into the agricultural workforce, their low educational levels mean that innovation and economic growth aren't in correlation. Around half of the population live below the poverty line. Number 2. Eritrea. Eritrea, which is located in the Horn of Africa, has experienced considerable growth to its economy in recent years, but unfortunately the effect of this hasn't trickled down to its citizens or the food chain. Poverty in Eritrea has become rampant, and more than 66% of the population lives below the poverty line. Access to sanitation is only available to 13% of Eritreans, and only 22% have access to clean water. Number 1. Burundi. Over half of Burundi's 9.85 million citizens live below the poverty line, with an estimated 35% of the population being out of work. The main problem with Burundi is not that it can't produce food, but that due to overpopulation, soil erosion, climate change, high food prices and an ongoing civil war, the country has to import more than they are exporting. In the last few years alone, due to these factors, and the increase of internally displaced citizens who can't produce their own food, the subsistence economy of Burundi has contracted by 25%.